Punctuating dialogue can be kind of confusing. So in this video, we're going to break it down. We're going to be talking about American style, and specifically for fiction, we're going to be referring to the Chicago Manual of Style Recommendations, which is the standard for U.S. fiction. I'm Victoria, author, editor, and the owner of Blue Pen. Without further ado, let's get into it. All right, first things first, punctuation. What do we do with the punctuation when we're writing dialogue? So again, this is American style. Periods and commas are always going to go inside the quotation marks. So no matter what, periods and commas inside quotations. Exclamation marks and question marks, however, are only going to go inside the quotation marks if they belong to the quoted material. So if a character asks a question, then that question mark is going to be inside the quotation mark. But let's say there are nested quotation marks and the character is asking a question about something that someone else said. Maybe it reads, did she really mean it when she said, I don't care about you? And I don't care about you is in quotation marks because the question mark does not belong to that quoted material. The I don't care about you was not the question. The question is being posed about that. So in that case, the question mark goes outside the quotation mark. You might have this happen too when you're referencing things like stories or poems, things that are put in quotation marks, but are not dialogue. That's probably the more common scenario. But those are the basic punctuation rules you need to remember. So not bad, right? When you really break it down, commas and periods inside, and exclamation marks and question marks inside if they belong to the quoted material. Now in American style, we are using double quotation marks, whereas in British style, they would be using single quotation marks. Okay, so how do we punctuate dialogue tags? For myself and the editors at Blue Pen, this is one of the common issues, especially with newer writers. So you always use a comma between dialogue and a dialogue tag, regardless of whether the tag comes before or after the dialogue. So when I'm talking about dialogue tags, I'm referring to things like he said, she said, they said. So note that this is not going to be a full sentence. This also encompasses more creative tags like he whimpered, she grumbled, they wheezed. So it would be a piece of dialogue, a comma with the comma inside the quotation marks because commas are always inside the quotation marks. And then he said, period. You could also say she said, comma, and then the piece of dialogue. Now, if you do not use a tag, then you would end the dialogue with a period or with whatever punctuation the dialogue ends with, if that's a question mark, an exclamation mark. That includes when you are using action beats. So, quick primer on action beat, that is just identifying the speaker by using action rather than a dialogue tag. So if a character does something and then there's a piece of dialogue, the reader is going to assume that the character doing the thing is also the character who spoke the dialogue. Same thing if it's a dialogue and then the character does something. The reader is going to go ahead and make that assumption. But in that case, we treat the action beat and the dialogue separately. We do not use commas. And note that this does have to be a full sentence. Also, backing up to dialogue tags for a moment. If the sentence ends in a question mark or an exclamation mark, or rather if the dialogue ends in a question mark or exclamation mark and is followed by a dialogue tag, then you would not use a comma. You just use that question or exclamation mark, and then he said, she said. And like with all dialogue tags, the he, she, they said is not capitalized. All right, and finally, if the dialogue tag breaks the dialogue and 2 mid-sentence, then you use commas on both sides. Let's say the dialogue is actually, comma, he said, comma, you're lying. Because actually you're lying is the full sentence. It's not 2 separate sentences. It's one sentence broken by a dialogue tag. Then we're going to use commas. However, if they are 2 separate sentences, then you would only use a comma before the dialogue tag. So if it were actually you're lying, comma, he said, period, I know the truth. Now, I know some of this is probably going to be easier to grasp if you can actually see it. So I highly recommend that you jump down to the description box when you're finished with this video and check out our blog post on the matter covering this same content, but I have a bunch of examples written out. And I also included references to the relevant Chicago sections, so you can grab your style guide and have a look at those yourself. Okay, more formatting goodness. So the next thing to talk about is smart quotes and dumb quotes, aka curly quotes and straight quotes. So in modern word processing software, the default is going to be smart quotes, which are curly and face the correct direction for the quoted material. Whereas straight quotes are just always straight up and down. So we like smart quotes because they differentiate between the opening and closing quotation mark. That is the default these days, and yes, it is kind of a minor thing, but it's still part of our standard formatting, and it's nice to do, especially because it's so easy. Most of the time, this is already going to be the default, and you're not going to have to worry about it. But if you do, all you need to do is go into Word and go into your autocorrect settings. There will be a box under auto format as you type that says automatically change straight quotes to curly quotes or to smart quotes, I believe. Just check that box and then you can actually just do a find and replace for quotation marks and it will automatically replace all of them with smart quotes. Remember, this also applies to apostrophes, so you might want to do the same thing for those. Again, in Chicago Section 6, they recommend smart quotes, so if we're aligning with Chicago style, then we want to make sure those are smart quotes. Alrighty, let's talk about nested quotation marks. Now, in American style, we are going to use double quotation marks, and when we have nested dialogue, then we would use single quotation marks. So when you are putting a quotation inside a quotation for any reason, whether it be direct speech or a piece of art that needs quotation marks, then it's going to be single. Now, if you were to put a quotation inside of that, so a quotation inside a quotation inside a quotation, then you're going to use double again. Now, note that single quotation marks have a specific purpose. They specifically denote nested dialogue. Some people try to use them as scare quotes or just as a stylistic choice, but really that's not correct. So the main purpose here is going to be, again, is that nested dialogue. And when you do it, a lot of the time you're going to wind up with a single quotation mark directly next to a double quotation mark. Now, according to Chicago style, we are not going to add space between those punctuation marks. Your interior designer may add a hairline space there for readability, but that would come at the design stage. So for the writer, all you need to remember there is nested quotation marks should be single if you're writing in American style, and no need to add a space between single and double quotation marks. Okay, here's a fun one that kind of gets lost in the fray sometimes. Interrupting dialogue with a full sentence. Okay, so in this case, we have a piece of dialogue that is a full sentence in itself. So let's say a one sentence piece of dialogue. Let's go ahead and give an example actually. So the piece of dialogue is, I don't know where that came from. Now, let's say we want to interrupt that with a full sentence, an action beat. It doesn't have to be an action beat, but let's go ahead and make it one. So we want to interrupt that piece of dialogue with, she wiped her brow. So it's a full sentence, so we can't use commas like we would with a dialogue tag, but we are interrupting the speaker mid-sentence, so we can't use periods. We're going to use em dashes. So in this case, the em dash is going to go outside of the quotation mark. So it's going to read, I don't know, closing quotation, em dash, she wiped her brow, opening quotation, where that came from. Now, this is a really fun technique to play with. It can help you build suspense and create some pretty neat effects within your dialogue. But of course, you do need to understand how to punctuate it correctly. And it is one of those techniques that would be rather easy to overuse and could get distracting pretty quickly. So my advice would be to use it sparingly. Okay, and so the last thing is another pretty common question. How do you format internal dialogue? So this is actually any type of unspoken discourse. Depending on your genre, this could take on so many meanings. So this could be internal dialogue, like I said, a character's internal thoughts. It could also be something like sign language. It could be written material. It could be some sort of telepathic communication. Any type of discourse that is not actually direct speech is going to fall into this category. So what is the correct way to format this? According to Chicago 13.43, the answer is however you want. Just be consistent. So you can use quotation marks. You can use italics. You can set it in Roman, which is just regular type. You can do whatever you want. You do not want to do both italics and quotation marks. That's pretty overkill and unnecessary. It can get confusing as well, but you can choose any of those options. Just keep it consistent. When I'm helping editing clients decide on these stylistic choices, I like to consider their work as a whole to make the choice that is going to be the easiest for the reader to understand and is going to cause the least confusion. It's also going to depend on your point of view. So if you're talking about internal dialogue and you're writing in first person, then you might be able to just set that in Roman. That would probably be fine. You're likely not going to need to differentiate between your character's internal thoughts and the rest of the narrative because the narrative essentially is their internal thoughts. However, if you're writing in third person, then you might want to italicize that internal dialogue. On the other hand, let's say you're writing something that includes a fair number of foreign phrases, which are going to be italicized. In that case, you might want internal dialogue in quotation marks so that it does not become mixed up with those foreign phrases, especially if there are going to be foreign phrases within the internal dialogue, because then it's just going to be a hot mess. You're going to have italics and Roman and everything all mixed up together. So we want to avoid that. We want to use the option that is going to be the best for clarity. But again, just be consistent. That's all I have for you on formatting dialogue. I hope you feel confident as you go forth and write some great dialogue. I do recommend you check out our blog post on this topic because seeing the examples can be very helpful. And if you don't have a copy of the Chicago Manual of Style, go grab one, have it to refer to. No one can be expected to remember all of the rules. Even professional editors are constantly referring to their style guides. And of course, if you need any help with editing, get in touch with our team at Blue Pen. We would love to be of assistance. Contact us at bluepenbooks.com/contact. That's it for today. Happy writing, and I'll see you on next time.